everyone, welcome back. So, in Fire Country Season 5, Episode 14, the show once again leans heavily into its most frustrating pattern, and this time it's getting harder to ignore. The episode title, Why Not Now, picks up after all the emotional fallout from Vince's death, but instead of slowing things down or giving characters room to process, it dives straight into another questionable storyline centered around Bode. And honestly, it feels like deja vu. Bode is now romantically involved with Chloe, which immediately raises a major question. Chloe's son is indirectly responsible for the chain of events that leads to Vince's death, a character who was meant something to literally everyone in the story. And yet the show pushes forward with this relationship as if that connection isn't deeply uncomfortable. No matter how you look at it, it creates a strange emotional disconnect that the episode never fully addresses. Instead, Bode continues to fall into a familiar role, the savior. This has become a clear pattern in his relationship, whether it was Gabriella, Audrey, or now Chloe. Bode is consistently drawn to women dealing with chaos in their life, and each time he positions himself as the solution. But instead of actually helping, he often ends up adding to that chaos. With Chloe, it's even more noticeable. She is dealing with a difficult situation already, raising a troubled son, trying to rebuild her life. The last thing she realistically needs is someone like Bode who brings emotional baggage and impulsive decision making into the mix. Yet the show frames this dynamic as romantic rather than problematic. What makes it worse is how everyone around Bode reacts. Since Vince is no longer there to challenge him, it feels like no one is willing to truly call Bode out. Sharon, in particular, continues to enable him, even when she shows concern, she ultimately backs down instead of holding him accountable. It creates this odd dynamic where Bode is treated like someone fragile who can't handle criticism even though he's a grown man, making very real, very impactful decision. And that lack of accountability is starting to hurt the show because without someone grounding him, Bode's action don't feel earned, they feel forced. Meanwhile, Jake's story isn't doing much to help. His relationship is suddenly moving at full speed with talks of moving in together, but it lacks the development needed to make it believable. It feels rushed, like the show is skipping steps just to create drama later. Jake also falls into his own pattern, holding on too tightly, getting overly involved and blurring boundaries, especially when it comes to his partner's career decision. It's the kind of setup that feels destined to fall apart and not in a compelling way. And then there's Manny, who at least brings a slightly different energy this episode. He's stepping back into the dating world, and while this meet cute with Dr. Camille leans into familiar tropes, it's still a welcome change of pace. Manny has been particularly intense this season, so seeing him in a lighter, more human situation is refreshing, even if the execution is a bit predictable. Still, even that storyline feels like it's moving too quickly, jumping straight into potential romance without giving the character time to breathe or grow on his own. And that really sums up the core issue with this episode. Everything feels rushed, forced, or built around Bored into the center as a hero, regardless of whether the story supports it. Even the emergency storyline, something this show usually relies on, fails to stand out, making the episode feel even flatter. By the end, it's hard to ignore the bigger problem. Fire Country isn't just repeating patterns, it's doubling down on them. Bode continues to change relationship where he can save someone. The people around him continue to enable him, and the show keeps prioritizing his hero narrative over logical character development. And unless something changes soon, it's a cycle that's only going to become more frustrating. Because right now it doesn't feel like the characters are growing, it feels like they are stuck. Thank you for watching. Bye.